Picture this. It's the summer of 1881, and in the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains of Arizona Territory, an old Apache warrior named Nana is facing the kind of choice that breaks men's souls. He's 70 years old. Think about that for a moment. 70. In an era when most people were lucky to see 50, when life on the frontier could end with a rattlesnake bite or a fall from a horse, this man has survived 7 decades of the most brutal warfare imaginable. But Nana isn't just any Apache. He's Chiricahua, and if you know anything about the Apache Wars, you know that name carries weight. The Chiricahua were the ones who made generals wake up in cold sweats, the ones who could vanish into landscape that looked as barren as the moon and then strike like lightning from clear skies. And Nana? He's been doing this longer than most of his enemies have been alive. As he emerges from his morning prayers, dragging that crippled foot across ground his ancestors considered sacred, Nana carries a burden that would crush a younger man. 8 months ago, picture it. It's still winter, still cold in the high desert. Mexican soldiers had done something that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They'd butchered his family, not just his wife, though that alone would drive most men to madness, his daughter, his grandchildren. Think about that. They weren't even warriors. They were gathering mezcal, the desert plant that Apache families had harvested for centuries, processing it the way their great-grandmothers had taught them. Now, you have to understand something about Apache warfare to grasp what's coming next. This isn't just about revenge, though God knows that's part of it. Apache fighting had rules, sacred laws that went back generations. When warriors went to battle, they followed strict protocols that kept their souls clean even in the midst of violence. There were things you didn't do, times you didn't fight, ways you didn't kill. These weren't just tactical considerations, they were spiritual requirements. Break them, and you might win the battle but lose something far more precious. But as Nana stands there in the morning light, watching dust clouds on the horizon that signal the approach of Captain Charles Parker's 8th Cavalry, he's calculating odds that would make a professional gambler walk away from the table. The Chiricahua Apache, who once numbered in the tens of thousands, are down to fewer than 2,000 free souls. The United States Army has 5,000 soldiers in the Southwest alone, armed with Springfield rifles that can kill at distances that would have been unimaginable to his grandfather's generation. And Captain Parker? This isn't some fresh-faced lieutenant from West Point who's never seen action. Parker is a veteran of the Red River War, where he learned to fight the Comanche and Kiowa on the Texas plains. He's led cavalry charges across terrain that would challenge a mountain goat. He commands 100 mounted soldiers, men who fought in campaigns from the Civil War to the Indian Wars. Parker once boasted, and this is recorded in Army records, that he would civilize every Apache or bury them trying. Not exactly the words of a man planning to show mercy. So here's Nana, conducting what amounts to a military staff meeting in the traditional Apache way. He's not calling for the biggest warriors or the most famous chiefs. Instead, he's selecting 40 followers through cold, methodical calculation. He chooses Katanai not because he's the bravest, but because the man can put a bullet through a silver dollar at 200 yards. He selects Sanchez not for his war record, but because Sanchez once served as an army scout and knows exactly how cavalry units deploy, how they think, what their standard operating procedures are. Young Sinar gets picked for a skill that sounds almost trivial until you think about it. He can mimic bird calls so perfectly that even other Apache have trouble telling the difference. In warfare, where communication can mean the difference between victory and massacre, that's not a parlor trick. That's a weapon. But here's where the story gets really interesting and really tragic. As Nana's sister Guyan, she's a medicine woman, think of her as the spiritual advisor to this whole enterprise, prepares what they call the war bundle. She delivers a warning that chills everyone present. The tactics Nana is considering, the methods he's planning to use, haven't been employed by Apache warriors for 3 generations. Not because they don't work, quite the opposite. They work too well. They violate sacred laws in ways that brought what the Apache call the spirit sickness down on warriors who used them. We're talking about wearing enemy uniforms, attacking during certain phases of the moon, that tradition says belong to the dead. Using deception so profound it can turn brother against brother. These aren't just military tactics, they're spiritual taboos that risk not just the warriors' lives, but their souls. Yet Nana's strategic mind sees something that honor-bound traditionalists cannot or will not acknowledge. The math is simple and brutal. 50,000 Apache reduced to 2,000 in just a few decades. Traditional warfare, no matter how courageously conducted, is leading straight to extinction. Honor is becoming a luxury the people can no longer afford. Through captured army dispatches and, yes, Apache raiders were intercepting mail and supply trains with the efficiency of a modern intelligence operation. Nana knows things that should terrify any rational man. He knows Parker's patrol schedules. He knows the supply lines. He knows the fatal assumption that every army officer makes, that Apache will fight predictably, according to their traditions, in ways that decades of military experience have taught soldiers to counter. As those dust clouds grow larger, announcing Parker's approach to a place called Hembrillo Canyon, Nana makes a choice that will echo through history. It's a slash in the earth, where ancient waters carved corridors perfect for ambush, the kind of terrain that makes cavalry officers nervous under the best of circumstances. But Nana isn't planning the best of circumstances. He's going to save his people's bodies, even if it damns their souls. And in 1881, with the last of the free Apache facing extinction, that might be the only choice left. The question is, when survival conflicts with everything your people hold sacred, when the old ways lead only to death, what price are you willing to pay for victory? Because what happens next in Hembrillo Canyon will force that question on every warrior following Nana into battle, and the answer will haunt the Apache Nation for generations to come. Dawn breaks on July 17, 1881, and if you could have watched Parker's column enter Hembrillo Canyon that morning, you would have seen what looked like textbook military precision. Picture it. Scouts leading the way, their eyes scanning every ridge and shadow. Supply wagons rolling in the center, protected by the main body of troops. Rear guard keeping watch behind them, Springfield rifles at the ready. This is how the United States cavalry had conquered a continent, and Captain Parker had no reason to think this day would be any different. But here's what Parker didn't know, couldn't know, and what makes this battle so absolutely terrifying from a tactical standpoint. Nana had been studying this exact deployment for 3 months. 3 months. Think about that level of preparation. While Parker was following standard cavalry doctrine, the same formations that had worked against the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, Nana was learning every detail of how the 8th Cavalry moved, how they thought, how their rigid adherence to protocol could become their greatest weakness. The first shots don't come from where you'd expect them, not from ahead, where cavalry scouts are trained to watch for trouble. They come from angles that shouldn't be possible. Apache marksmen hidden in caves that flash floods had carved over centuries, positions that Parker's scouts had actually checked but found empty. And here's the genius of it. Nana's warriors hadn't been there when the scouts passed. They'd waited in deeper chambers, breathing through hollow reeds, letting the cavalry think they'd cleared the area. Private William Morrison, a young soldier from Ohio who kept a diary that somehow survived the battle, writes during a brief lull in the fighting, "The bullets seem to come from the rock itself. It's like the mountain has turned against us." Within 40 minutes of entering the canyon, 12 soldiers are down. But the physical casualties are just the beginning of Parker's nightmare. As the captain orders his men into defensive positions, exactly what army doctrine says to do when caught in an ambush, uniformed figures approach from the rear. They look like the Mormon scouts who were supposed to be lagging behind, men Parker had worked with before. His soldiers lower their weapons. Some even wave. Only when these figures get within 50 yards does the deception reveal itself. These aren't Mormon scouts. They're Apache warriors wearing uniforms stripped from soldiers killed in an unrelated skirmish days earlier. And suddenly Parker's men are caught in crossfire from their own supposed allies. The psychological devastation exceeds the physical damage. When the real Mormon scouts come racing back toward the column, soldiers open fire on them, unable to tell friend from foe in the canyon's echoing chaos. Morrison writes, "We're shooting at our own men, and we can't stop ourselves. Every uniform might be a trap. But what happens at sunset crosses a line that makes even hardened Apache warriors hesitate. Nana orders something that violates the deepest laws of Apache warfare, using enemy dead as decoys. He has his men position the corpses of fallen cavalry soldiers to draw fire and reveal the remaining defenders' positions. Now, to understand why this matters, you need to know that Apache spiritual law treats the dead with profound reverence. Disturbing a corpse, even an enemy's, invites the spirit's eternal wrath. Young warriors who followed Nana this far begin to question whether they can go through with it. Guyan, the medicine woman, warns that this single act will require purification ceremonies that may never fully cleanse them. But Nana isn't done. As night falls over Hembrillo Canyon, something even more chilling begins. The Apache start singing not war songs or victory chants, but actual prayers for enemy souls. These are death chants in the ancient language that predates even Apache memory, and they serve a dual purpose. Yes, they're psychological warfare designed to terrorize Parker's surviving men, but they're also genuine spiritual observances, an attempt to honor the dead even while violating other sacred laws. Parker, crouched behind an overturned supply wagon with his ammunition running dangerously low, finally understands what he's facing. This isn't traditional Apache warfare. This isn't even recognizable as the kind of fighting he learned on the Great Plains. His tactical superiority, the training, the weapons, the numbers, means absolutely nothing here. Consider the mathematics of this nightmare. Parker's men have fired over 300 rounds for every confirmed Apache casualty. Meanwhile, Nana's warriors, trained from childhood in the kind of patience that modern soldiers can barely imagine, are averaging 12 shots per enemy killed. They're not just winning this battle, they're conducting a masterclass in resource management under fire. And here's the most terrifying part. As the night deepens and those death chants continue echoing off the canyon walls, Parker realizes that his ammunition is depleting at rates that will leave his men defenseless by dawn. Nana isn't just fighting a battle, he's conducting a siege with no siege lines, bleeding Parker's force dry while conserving his own resources for what's clearly going to be a long campaign. The old Apache has turned traditional cavalry doctrine inside out. Instead of the quick, decisive engagement that army officers expect from Indian warfare, Nana is fighting a war of attrition where time favors the side that can disappear into landscape and reappear at will. Parker's men, trapped in a narrow canyon with limited water and dwindling ammunition, are learning what it means to face an enemy who's rewritten all the rules. Day 2 dawns with a horror that no cavalry manual had prepared Parker for. The water sources, those precious springs that made Hembrillo Canyon tactically viable, show unmistakable signs of contamination, not poison, which would kill quickly and obviously, but animal carcasses upstream. It's an old Apache technique that forces enemies into an impossible choice: die slowly of thirst or risk disease that could be even worse. But Nana understands something about 19th century military medicine that makes this tactic particularly devastating. Parker's wounded are multiplying the crisis exponentially. In cavalry doctrine, every injured man requires 4 healthy soldiers to evacuate safely through terrain like this narrow canyon. Think about that mathematics. Parker started with 100 men, he's lost 12 dead and has 18 wounded, serious enough to need assistance. That means 72 soldiers are effectively out of action just to move the casualties, reducing his combat effectiveness by more than 80%. Lieutenant James Crawford, Parker's second-in-command, proposes something that sounds logical until you consider the human cost. Abandon the wounded, leave them with minimal supplies and fight their way out with the remaining effective soldiers. It's unthinkable in army doctrine, but mathematically, it makes perfect sense. The argument that follows splits Parker's command exactly as Nana intended, because attacking an enemy's cohesion often proves more devastating than attacking their bodies. Meanwhile, Nana is orchestrating what can only be called a supply chain miracle. Remember those pre-positioned caches I mentioned? For months before this battle, Apache raiders had been burying supplies along potential battle routes, not just food and water, but ammunition, medical supplies, even spare weapons. Every spent cartridge gets collected by Nana's warriors. Every round is stripped from enemy dead. When possible, they wound rather than kill, knowing that wounded soldiers drain resources while dead ones merely reduce numbers. By noon of day 2, Nana has lost fewer than 6 warriors, while Parker commands barely 50 effective fighters. But here's what makes this campaign truly remarkable from a strategic standpoint. Nana isn't fighting for territorial control or even immediate victory. He's fighting for something far more valuable: reputation. The afternoon brings his masterstroke. He deliberately allows 3 wounded cavalrymen to escape, knowing they'll carry tales of Apache invincibility back to Fort Bowie. But these aren't random survivors. Nana has calculated which men will be most believable, most articulate, most likely to spread the kind of fear that takes on a life of its own. The messages they carry, written by Parker in growing desperation, reveal the column's dire position in detail that Army intelligence will study for decades. Coordinates, troop strength, ammunition status, the complete breakdown of cavalry effectiveness against unconventional tactics. It's intelligence gold, and Nana knows exactly how it will be used. Because here's the thing about military bureaucracy that Nana has learned through careful observation. The army will send a relief force. They have to. Leaving Parker's column to be massacred would create political problems that reach all the way to Washington. So Nana positions his warriors along the most likely route in a place called Devil's Pass, and waits. When Colonel Robert Grierson arrives with 2 companies of the 10th Cavalry, the famous Buffalo Soldiers who've earned respect even from their Apache enemies, he rides straight into a secondary ambush that demonstrates the terrifying scope of what they're facing. This isn't random raiding by desperate warriors. This is coordinated campaign planning that would impress instructors at West Point. Grierson, a veteran of campaigns from the Civil War through the Great Sioux War, realizes within the first few minutes of contact that everything the Army thought it knew about Apache capabilities needs to be reconsidered. These aren't traditional hit-and-run tactics. This is strategic depth that suggests months of preparation, intelligence gathering that rivals anything European armies might attempt. The relief force engagement lasts only 3 hours, but it's enough to prove Nana's central point. The United States Army cannot protect its own forces in terrain where Apache choose to fight. Grierson withdraws after losing 13 men and accomplishing nothing except confirming that Parker's column faces annihilation. But here's what makes Day 2 truly significant in the broader context of the Apache Wars. Word of these engagements spreads through army posts across the Southwest faster than official dispatches can carry it. Soldiers talk, survivors tell stories. Within a week, every cavalry unit in Arizona Territory knows that something fundamental has changed in how Apache warfare works. The psychological impact extends beyond military circles. Settlers who'd begun to believe the Apache threat was manageable suddenly face the possibility that 70-year-old warriors can still make the frontier uninhabitable. Politicians in Washington start receiving telegrams demanding more troops, more resources, more everything. And Nana? As evening falls on his second day of battle, he surveys the tactical situation with the satisfaction of a chess master who's moved his pieces into perfect position. Parker's force is broken. The relief column has been repulsed. Every engagement has demonstrated Apache superiority in terrain of their choosing. But the old warrior also carries the weight of spiritual consequences that grow heavier with each violation of sacred law. Young Sinar, who wore enemy clothing in the uniform deception, speaks of nightmares where dead soldiers' spirits follow him through the darkness. Goyan conducts purification ceremonies, but certain spiritual debts may never be fully repaid. The question that haunts every Apache fighter as they prepare for what might be the final assault isn't whether they can win this battle. They've already proven that. The question is whether they can live with the methods required for victory, and whether those methods will ultimately save or damn the Apache people. The third day brings mutual exhaustion and Parker's final humiliation, but also something more complex than simple military victory. Nana, wounded in the shoulder by Lieutenant Crawford's desperate sortie at dawn, personally leads what everyone expects to be the annihilation of the cavalry column. But here's where the old warrior's strategic thinking transcends mere tactics and enters the realm of grand strategy. He doesn't destroy Parker's force. Instead, He breaks their spirit so completely that 37 survivors stagger back to Fort Bowie, carrying stories that will echo through army posts for decades to come. Think about the calculation involved here. Nana understands that 37 witnesses telling tales of Apache invincibility will have far greater strategic impact than 100 corpses that prove nothing except Apache capability for violence. These survivors speak in whispers of Apache fighters who seemed to vanish into solid rock, of the old warrior who fought like a man possessed by mountain spirits themselves. They describe tactics that no military academy had taught them to counter, methods of warfare that turned their training into liability rather than asset. But victory carries a price that can't be measured in blood alone. As Nana's band performs the cleansing rituals required after violating sacred laws, some warriors discover that certain spiritual wounds don't heal with ceremony. Young Sinar, who wore enemy uniforms during the deception attacks, can't stop the nightmares. Dead soldiers' spirits follow him through sleep, demanding justice that Apache law says he owes them. Goyan, the medicine woman, conducts ritual after ritual, burning sacred herbs and chanting prayers that her grandmother taught her. But some debts transcend the power of earthly ceremony. The Apache world splits along lines that will never fully heal. Some bands herald Nana as the savior who proved the people could still defeat armies, while traditional leaders condemn his methods as the very corruption that will bring spiritual destruction upon all Apache. The strategic ripples spread with the speed of telegraph wires. Within 6 months, Congress authorizes 10,000 additional troops for the Southwest, an economic commitment that costs more than 50 years of negotiated treaties would have required. It's exactly the opposite of what most people would expect. Nana's victory doesn't end the Apache Wars. It escalates them into the most expensive Indian conflict in American history. Military academies from Berlin to Tokyo begin studying what becomes known as Nana's Campaign, recognizing principles of guerrilla warfare that will resurface in conflicts across the 20th century. The idea that inferior numbers can defeat superior forces through unconventional tactics isn't new, but Nana's systematic approach to psychological warfare, resource management, and strategic deception becomes a template for future asymmetric conflicts. Captain Parker, promoted to major despite his defeat, because the Army desperately needs officers with hard-won knowledge of Apache capabilities, spends the rest of his career rewriting cavalry doctrine. The manual he produces includes Apache scout battalions, counterinsurgency tactics that prefigure modern special operations, and psychological warfare principles that wouldn't look out of place in a 21st century military handbook. But the personal cost to Parker extends beyond his military career. In letters to his wife that survive in Army archives, he writes, "I have seen the face of warfare's future, and it belongs to men like Nana who understand that victory requires sacrificing everything civilized people hold sacred." When Nana finally surrenders in 1883, it's not from military defeat, but from exhaustion and the crushing weight of watching his people confined to reservations, regardless of their battlefield successes. His surrender negotiations reveal a man who understood the mathematical impossibility of long-term Apache independence better than any of his contemporaries. The terms he accepts guarantee medical care for his wounded warriors, protection for Apache families, and, most importantly, acknowledgement that his campaign had forced fundamental changes in how the United States military approaches unconventional warfare. It's not the victory he wanted, but its recognition of something achieved that transcends mere tactical success. Nana carries dual legacies that will outlive him by generations. To military historians studying the evolution of guerrilla warfare, he's the genius who proved that inferior numbers mean nothing against superior tactics properly applied. His methods will be studied in conflicts from the Philippines to Vietnam, anywhere small forces face overwhelming conventional superiority. But to the Apache people, his legacy remains forever complicated. He's the warrior who saved Apache bodies by risking Apache souls, whose choice to break sacred law poses questions that have no easy answers. When survival conflicts with spiritual law, which path leads to true victory? When the old ways guarantee extinction, what price becomes acceptable for preserving the people? Even as Nana dies peacefully in 1896 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, medicine men still debate whether his forbidden tactics preserved or doomed the Apache way of life. Some say his ghost wanders between worlds, neither fully honored nor condemned, forever carrying the weight of necessary sins that saved lives while costing souls. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of resistance, survival, and the prices that desperate people pay when facing extinction. In 1881, Nana chose to break sacred laws rather than watch his people disappear. Whether that choice saved or damned the Apache remains one of history's most haunting questions. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Perhaps the greatest warriors aren't the ones who win clean victories, but the ones willing to carry impossible burdens so their people might have a chance to survive. In the end, Nana's campaign wasn't just about defeating cavalry columns in narrow canyons. It was about proving that the Apache would fight by any means necessary, pay any price required, to remain Apache. And in that sense, maybe the old warrior won after all.